The church bells of St. Michael's Cathedral rang out across Manhattan on what should have been the most perfect Saturday in October. Inside, 300 of New York's elite sat in pristine rows, their designer gowns creating a sea of elegance and expectation. At the altar, Jonathan Hale stood tall in his charcoal tuxedo, his steel-gray eyes fixed on the ornate doors. He was 45, worth $800 million, and about to marry the woman everyone said was perfect for him. Sabrina Lint moved down the aisle like something from a fairy tale, her ivory silk gown flowing behind her, her dark hair swept into an elegant chignon, her smile radiant enough to light the stained glass windows. The guests murmured their approval. Mrs. Mildred Hale, Jonathan's 70-year-old aunt, dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Finally, she whispered, "Jonathan is choosing someone worthy of the Hale name." But in the shadows of the back pew, 9-year-old Olive Bennett sat with her hands clenched in her lap. Her blonde hair had been hastily braided that morning, and her blue-gray eyes darted between Sabrina's face and her hands, specifically to the antique diamond ring that caught the light as she walked. Olive's heart hammered against her ribs. She tried to tell them. She tried to warn Jonathan 3 days ago, but he dismissed her with the same distracted wave he always gave her concerns. She tried to tell Mrs. Mildred, but the old woman had scolded her for telling lies about such a lovely lady. Only Alfred, the quiet driver who'd worked for the Hale family for 15 years, had listened. Only Alfred had seen the fear in her eyes and believed that what she'd witnessed wasn't the imagination of a troubled foster child. The priest raised his hands, and the congregation fell silent. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Jonathan Michael Hale and Sabrina Rose Lint in holy matrimony." Olive watched as Sabrina's fingers curled around the small velvet box that held Jonathan's wedding ring. The ring she'd seen Sabrina tampering with just 2 nights ago. The ring that had left angry red marks on Sabrina's own skin when she'd tested it. The priest continued his ancient words, but they seemed to blur together in Olive's mind. Her foster father was about to put that ring on his finger. The ring that held something terrible in its hidden compartment. Olive's breath came in short gasps. Around her, the guests sat in rapt attention, their faces glowing with romance. They couldn't see what she saw. They couldn't smell the faint chemical scent that seemed to follow Sabrina wherever she went. If anyone here is just cause why these two should not be wed, speak now or forever hold your peace. The silence stretched across the cathedral like a held breath. This was it. This was her moment. But Jonathan wasn't even looking at her. His eyes were locked on Sabrina's beautiful face, completely mesmerized. Mrs. Mildred sat in the front row, nodding approvingly. 300 guests waited for the ceremony to continue. And then Sabrina opened the ring box. Olive saw the glint of gold, saw Sabrina's knowing smile as she prepared to place the death trap on Jonathan's finger. And something inside the little girl snapped. She stood up so fast her hymnal clattered to the floor. "No!" The word tore from her throat like a physical thing, echoing off the vaulted ceiling and stopping every heart in the room. "Her ring holds poison. Don't marry her." The silence that followed was deafening. 300 faces turned toward the back of the church, their expressions shifting from shock to confusion to embarrassment. Sabrina's face went white, then flushed with what looked like indignation. "Don't put on that ring," Olive shouted, her voice cracking with desperation. "She's trying to kill you." Jonathan's face transformed from joy to mortification. Mrs. Mildred rose from her seat like an avenging angel, her face twisted with fury. "Security," she shrieked. "Remove that child immediately." But Olive wasn't done. She pushed past the grasping hands of the ushers, stumbling down the aisle as tears streamed down her face. "Please, Jonathan, please listen to me. I saw her put something in the ring. I saw her." The cathedral erupted in whispers and gasps. Some guests pulled out their phones, recording what they assumed was a disturbed child's breakdown. Others looked away in secondhand embarrassment. Jonathan stood frozen at the altar, his face a mask of humiliation and anger. This was supposed to be his perfect day, his new beginning, and his adopted daughter. The child he'd taken in only because his dying sister had begged him to, was destroying it in front of everyone who mattered in his world. "Olive," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos like ice. "That's enough." But as the security guards reached for her, as the guests murmured their judgment, as Sabrina's eyes flashed with something that looked less like hurt and more like calculation, Olive made one last desperate plea. "The ring, Jonathan. Look inside the ring." 3 days earlier, Olive Bennett had learned that the truth was a dangerous thing to carry alone. She'd been living in the Hale mansion for 8 months now, ever since Jonathan's sister Emma had died of cancer and left behind a final wish, that her daughter's best friend would never end up back in the foster system. But Jonathan Hale was not a man built for children. His world was board meetings and media acquisitions, hostile takeovers and strategic partnerships. He lived in clean lines and predictable outcomes, in spaces that echoed with emptiness rather than laughter. When Olive had arrived with her single suitcase and anxiety-worn stuffed animals, she'd landed in his life like a colorful explosion he didn't know how to clean up. So he delegated. Mrs. Mildred managed the household staff. Alfred drove Olive to school. A succession of nannies handled the day-to-day care, though none stayed long. Olive's sharp observations about their motives had a way of making people uncomfortable. And Sabrina? Sabrina had arrived 6 months ago like an answer to every prayer Jonathan had never thought to pray. She was everything a media mogul needed in a wife. Sophisticated enough for charity galas, intelligent enough to discuss his business, beautiful enough to grace magazine covers. She spoke 3 languages, held a doctorate in art history, and had a trust fund that meant she wasn't after his money, or so it seemed. But Olive saw things differently. It started with small observations that adults dismiss as unimportant. The way Sabrina's smile never quite reached her eyes when she looked at Olive. The way she always wore gloves when she cooked, claiming sensitive skin. The way she carried a small leather case that she never let anyone else touch. "She doesn't like children," Olive had told Jonathan one evening, finding him in his study. He'd barely looked up from his papers. "She's adjusting. This is new for all of us." She told Mrs. Patterson I was disturbed and needed professional help. Olive persisted. "Maybe she has a point," Jonathan had said, his tone suggesting the conversation was over. That night, Olive had lain awake wondering if she really was going crazy. Maybe the adults were right. Maybe she was seeing problems where none existed because she was afraid of losing another family. But then came the night that changed everything. It was Tuesday, 2 days before the wedding. Olive had gotten up for water and heard voices from the kitchen. Jonathan and Sabrina having what sounded like an intimate conversation over late-night coffee. She'd started to turn back when she heard Sabrina's voice take on a strange, cold tone she'd never heard before. "The ring came back from the jeweler today. The engraving looks perfect. I can't wait to see it," Jonathan had replied, his voice warm with anticipation. "Oh, you'll see it soon enough." Something in Sabrina's tone made Olive freeze. She crept closer to the kitchen doorway, staying hidden in the shadows. Through the crack between door and frame, she could see Sabrina sitting at the marble island, a small velvet box open in front of her. Jonathan's wedding ring caught the light, a thick gold band with intricate Celtic knots. But Sabrina wasn't just admiring it. She was working on it. Olive watched in fascination and growing horror as Sabrina used a tiny tool to pry at what looked like a hidden compartment in the ring's band. With surgical precision, she opened a cavity so small it was barely visible and used an eyedropper to place a single clear drop inside. The smell hit Olive immediately, bitter and chemical, like cleaning supplies that made her eyes water. Sabrina closed the compartment, wiped the ring carefully, and then, strangest of all, slipped it onto her own finger, as if testing the fit. Within seconds, angry red welts appeared on her skin where the ring touched. She hissed in pain and quickly removed it, running her finger under cold water. "Perfect," she whispered to herself, and in that single word, Olive heard something that made her blood run cold. This wasn't love. This was something else entirely. Jonathan had already left the kitchen, calling good night over his shoulder, completely oblivious to what his fiancée was doing. Sabrina carefully placed the ring back in its box and locked it in the small leather case she always carried. Olive slipped back to her room, her heart pounding. She pulled out her tablet and began searching. What she found made her stomach drop. Throughout history, rings with hidden compartments have been used by spies and assassins to carry poison. The victim would wear the ring, and body heat would slowly release the toxic substance through their skin. Death would come gradually, often attributed to illness or natural causes. She tried to tell herself she was overreacting, that she'd misunderstood what she'd seen. But the red welts on Sabrina's finger told a different story. Whatever was in that ring was dangerous enough to burn skin on contact. The next morning, she'd approached Jonathan in his office, her palms sweating as she tried to find the words. "Jonathan, I need to tell you something about Sabrina." "Not now, Olive. I have a conference call in 5 minutes. But it's important. It's about the wedding ring." He'd looked up then, his expression shifting to the particular exhaustion adults get when children demand attention at inconvenient times. "Olive, I know this is hard for you. Change is difficult. But Sabrina is going to be part of our family now. And these fantasies you've been having about her need to stop. They're not fantasies. I saw her. Enough." His voice had the finality of a judge's gavel. "After the wedding, we'll look into getting you someone to talk to." Olive had left his office feeling like she was drowning. The one person who was supposed to protect her had dismissed her as a troubled child, making up stories. She tried Mrs. Mildred next, finding the older woman arranging flowers for the wedding. "Mrs. Mildred, I need to tell you something about Sabrina's ring." The response had been swift and brutal. "That is quite enough, young lady. I will not have you spreading malicious gossip about a lovely woman who has done nothing but try to be kind to you." Mrs. Mildred's eyes had blazed with indignation. "If I hear one more word of these lies, you'll find yourself back where you came from, foster care or not. Do I make myself clear?" Olive had nodded, tears streaming down her face, and fled to her room. That night, as she lay in bed listening to wedding preparations echoing through the house, she made a decision. If the adults wouldn't listen to her, she'd have to find another way to protect Jonathan, even if it meant saving the man who'd never learned to love her. Alfred Morrison had been driving for wealthy families for 35 years, and in that time, he learned that children often see what adults choose to ignore. At 65, with silver hair and kind brown eyes that had witnessed decades of family secrets, Alfred understood that his job was about more than transportation. He was confessor, confidant, and sometimes the only adult who really listened. He'd seen Olive's distress building over the past few weeks, noticed how she'd grown quiet and withdrawn as the wedding approached. While Jonathan buried himself in business and Mrs. Mildred fussed over arrangements, Alfred had watched a little girl carry the weight of something too heavy for her small shoulders. The morning after Olive's failed attempts to warn the family, Alfred found her sitting in the garden behind the mansion, her knees drawn up to her chest. "Rough night?" he asked gently, settling onto the stone bench beside her. Olive looked up with eyes red from crying. At 9 years old, she'd already learned that most adults stopped listening when you needed them most, but Alfred had always been different. "They think I'm crazy," she whispered. "Who thinks you're crazy?" "Everyone. Jonathan, Mrs. Mildred, probably you too." She wiped her nose with the back of her hand. "Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I didn't see what I thought I saw." Alfred was quiet for a long moment, watching the morning sun filter through the oak trees. "Why don't you tell me what you saw, and let me decide if you're crazy?" So Olive did. She told him about the hidden compartment in the ring, about the clear liquid that had burned Sabrina's skin, about the chemical smell, and the way Sabrina had smiled when she said perfect. She told him about her research, about poison rings and contact toxins. She told him everything, and Alfred listened without interruption, his face growing more serious with each detail. When she finished, he was quiet for so long that Olive began to wonder if he'd stopped believing her too. "Alfred," she said finally, "do you think I'm making it all up?" He turned to look at her, and she saw something in his eyes that she hadn't seen from any adult in weeks. Respect. "No, child, I don't think you're making it up. I think you saw exactly what you think you saw." The relief that flooded through Olive was so intense, she almost started crying again. You believe me? I believe you. And more than that, I think you might have saved Jonathan's life. Alfred had his own reasons for being suspicious of Sabrina Litt. In his years of driving for the family, he developed an instinct for people who weren't what they seemed. Sabrina was beautiful, charming, and intelligent, but there was something underneath that beauty that set his teeth on edge. It was the small things. The way she never looked directly at the household staff. The way she asked pointed questions about Jonathan's business dealings, his health, his will. The way she'd suggested that Olive needed professional help whenever the child showed signs of attachment to Jonathan. And then there was the leather case she always carried. I need your help, Olive said urgently. The wedding is tomorrow. If I'm right, if there really is poison in that ring, then we need proof, Alfred finished. Something more than what you saw, something that will make Jonathan listen. But how? She keeps the ring locked in her case. She never leaves it anywhere. Alfred smiled grimly. She left it somewhere yesterday. In my car. Olive's eyes widened. What do you mean? Yesterday afternoon, I drove her to the final dress fitting. She was on the phone the whole time, very upset about something. When we got to the boutique, she rushed out so fast she left her case on the seat. Did you look inside? I thought about it, Alfred admitted. But then she came running back before I could decide. But here's the thing. The case wasn't locked when she left it. The clasps were undone. Olive's heart began to race. So you could have opened it. Could have. Didn't. But I did notice that there was more than just a ring box inside. There were small glass bottles, the kind you might find in a chemistry set. And there was a smell, sharp, chemical, like cleaning fluid. That's it, Olive exclaimed. That's the smell I noticed when she was working on the ring. Alfred nodded slowly. I've been thinking about this all night. There's something else you should know. 3 days ago, I overheard a phone conversation Sabrina had while I was driving her to lunch. He paused, remembering the cold tone in Sabrina's voice. She said, the timeline is perfect. The wedding is Saturday, and the effects should begin manifesting within a week. By the time anyone thinks to look for foul play, it will be too late to trace. Then she laughed and said, 800 million is worth a little patience. Olive's face went white. She's going to kill him for his money. That's what it sounds like to me. We have to stop the wedding. Alfred looked at the determined little girl beside him, seeing in her the kind of courage that most adults had lost somewhere along the way. We will, he said firmly, but we need to be smart about it. Jonathan won't listen to either of us based on overheard conversations and suspicious behavior. We need evidence, real, undeniable proof. What kind of proof? Alfred was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then his face brightened with an idea. The car has a dashboard camera. It records everything that happens in the back seat for security purposes. If Sabrina really was working on that ring in my car at any point, the camera would have caught it. Exactly. And yesterday, when she left her case behind, she was in such a panic that she might have done something incriminating while trying to secure it. Hope bloomed in Olive's chest for the first time in days. Can we check the footage? We could do better than that. I can pull the video files and put them on a flash drive. If there's anything there, we'll have proof that even Jonathan can't dismiss. Olive threw her arms around Alfred's neck, hugging him tight. For the first time since Emma died, she felt like she had a real ally, someone who saw her as more than a problem to be managed. Thank you for believing me, she whispered. Alfred patted her back gently. Thank you for having the courage to speak up. Not many adults would have been brave enough to say what you said. But as they sat in the garden making their plans, neither of them noticed the figure watching from an upstairs window. Sabrina Litt stood perfectly still behind the curtains, her beautiful face twisted with calculation and growing concern. She'd seen Olive talking to the driver before, but this conversation looked different, more intense, more urgent, and tomorrow was her wedding day. The mansion felt different on the night before the wedding, filled with electric anticipation that hummed through every room. Florists had transformed the grand ballroom into a garden paradise. Caterers had filled the kitchen with tomorrow's feast, and 300 place cards sat perfectly arranged. But in the servants' quarters above the garage, Alfred Morrison sat hunched over his laptop, his weathered hands trembling as he scrolled through hours of dashboard camera footage. "There," Olive whispered, pointing at the screen. "That's her getting in the car yesterday." Alfred adjusted his reading glasses and squinted at the timestamp. 2:47 p.m., the day before the wedding. Sabrina slid into the back seat of the black Mercedes, her phone already pressed to her ear, her face tight with stress. "I need to hear what she's saying," Alfred muttered, adjusting the audio settings. Sabrina's voice filled the small room, crystal clear. "Told you, everything is on schedule. The ring is ready. The ceremony is at 3 o'clock, and within hours it will be over." A pause as she listened. "No, there haven't been any complications." "Well, except..." Alfred and Olive exchanged glances. "Except what?" Olive breathed. On screen, Sabrina glanced around the car nervously. She lowered her voice, but the microphone still picked up every word. "The child is becoming a problem. She's too observant, asks too many questions. Yesterday, I caught her staring at my ring case, and this morning she tried to tell Jonathan something about the wedding ring. He dismissed her, of course, but..." Another pause. Then Sabrina's face hardened. "I don't care what it takes. I've invested too much time and effort to let a 9-year-old ruin everything. If she becomes a real threat, we'll deal with her permanently." Olive's face went white. Alfred reached over and squeezed her shoulder protectively. "Keep watching," he said grimly. On screen, Sabrina ended her phone call and immediately opened the leather case she always carried. Alfred increased the zoom, and they could clearly see the ring box nestled beside several small glass bottles and what looked like medical syringes. But then Sabrina did something that made both of them catch their breath. She opened the ring box and carefully removed Jonathan's wedding band. Under the car's interior lighting, they could see her press something on the side of the ring, and a tiny compartment popped open. So small, it would be invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. "She's refilling it," Olive whispered in horror. Using an eyedropper, Sabrina carefully placed 2 drops of clear liquid into the hidden compartment, then sealed it closed. She held the ring up to the light, examining it with the satisfaction of an artist completing a masterpiece. "Perfect," she murmured, just as Olive had described. "By next week, he'll start feeling dizzy, nauseous. His doctor will think it's stress from the wedding and the merger. By the time anyone realizes it's poison, I'll be a grieving widow with full access to his fortune." Alfred paused the video, his face grim. "We have her, but will Jonathan believe it?" Olive asked. "What if he thinks we faked it somehow?" "He can't deny video evidence from his own security system," Alfred replied. He fast-forwarded to the moment when Sabrina had left the car at the boutique, rushing out in her hurry to make her appointment. The camera clearly showed her leather case sitting open on the seat, its contents spilled across the leather upholstery. There were bottles labeled with chemical names that neither Alfred nor Olive recognized, but one label was clear enough to read. "Ricin. Handle with extreme care." "Dear God," Alfred breathed. "She's not just planning to poison him. She's planning to murder him." "We have to show this to Jonathan right now," Olive said, jumping up from her chair. "Wait." Alfred caught her arm gently. "It's nearly midnight. The house is full of wedding guests and family members. If we burst in there with this footage, it could cause a panic. Worse, it could give Sabrina a chance to destroy the evidence or escape. Then what do we do?" Alfred saved the video files to a flash drive, his mind racing through possibilities. "We wait until tomorrow, right before the ceremony, when everyone is gathered and there's no way for her to run or cover her tracks. We present the evidence publicly, in front of witnesses. But what if she tries to hurt someone before then?" Alfred considered this, then made a decision that surprised even himself. "Then we make sure she doesn't get the chance." He pulled out his phone and dialed 911. "911, what's your emergency?" "I need to report a planned murder," Alfred said calmly. "I have video evidence of someone preparing to poison a man at his wedding tomorrow." The dispatcher took down all the information, the address, the time of the wedding, the nature of the threat. She assured Alfred that detectives would be present at the ceremony, ready to act the moment they had confirmation of the crime. "You did the right thing," Alfred told Olive as he hung up the phone. "Whatever happens tomorrow, At least we know Jonathan will be safe. But as they sat in the quiet garage apartment, preparing for what would undoubtedly be the most dramatic wedding in Manhattan's social history, neither of them could shake the feeling that they were missing something important. 3 floors above them, in the mansion's master guest suite, Sabrina Lint paced in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, her phone pressed to her ear once again. "Change of plans," she said to the voice on the other end. "I think they know about the ring." "How is that possible? The child saw me working on it, and now she's convinced the driver to help her. They've been spending too much time together, having too many private conversations. Can you eliminate them before the ceremony?" Sabrina glanced at the clock on the nightstand. 12:43 a.m. In 14 hours, she would either be one of the wealthiest women in New York, or she would be in prison. It's too late for that. There are too many people in the house, too many witnesses. If something happened to them now, it would raise too many questions. Then you need to accelerate the timeline. What do you mean? Don't wait for the ring. Use the backup plan. Sabrina's blood ran cold. The backup plan was messy, more obvious, but it would work faster. Are you sure? That's much more likely to be detected. Better to take the risk than lose everything. You have a compound in your possession. Sabrina walked to her suitcase and opened a hidden compartment in the lining. Inside was a small vial of clear liquid and a hypodermic needle. Yes, then use it during the reception when everyone is distracted by celebration. A quick injection, and he'll collapse within minutes. It will look like a heart attack brought on by wedding excitement. And the pause on the other end of the line was long and ominous. Children have accidents all the time, especially troubled children with a history of attention-seeking behavior. If she happens to fall down the stairs after making wild accusations at the wedding, Sabrina closed her eyes. When she first agreed to this job, she'd been told it would be clean, simple, undetectable. Seduce a lonely widower, marry him, let the poison do its work slowly and naturally. No one was supposed to get hurt except the target. But now a 9-year-old girl and an elderly driver had complicated everything. "Understand," she said finally. The line went dead, and Sabrina stared at her reflection in the dark window. Tomorrow she would walk down the aisle in her $1,000 gown, smile for the cameras, and exchange vows with a man she planned to murder before the day was over. And if a child and old man tried to stop her, they would learn what happened to people who got in the way of $800 million. St. Michael's Cathedral had never looked more beautiful or more dangerous. The October sun streamed through stained glass windows, casting jeweled patterns across marble floors. 300 guests filled the carved oak pews, their faces bright with anticipation as they waited for Manhattan's most eligible bachelor to finally tie the knot. In the bride's preparation room, Sabrina Lint adjusted her veil one final time, her hands steady despite the violence she was planning to commit. The ivory silk gown hugged her figure perfectly. The antique lace veil had belonged to 4 generations of society brides, and the diamond necklace at her throat had been featured in Vogue. She looked like every little girl's dream of a perfect bride. The small vial of concentrated poison was hidden in the folds of her bouquet, nestled among white roses and baby's breath. The hypodermic needle was taped to her thigh, concealed beneath layers of silk and tulle. If the ring plan failed, and she was increasingly certain it would, she had other options. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Lint, it's time." Sabrina took one last look in the mirror, practiced her radiant smile, and picked up her bouquet. The scent of roses couldn't quite mask the bitter chemical smell of the poison, but no one would think to look for such a thing at a wedding. In the groom's preparation room across the hall, Jonathan Hale adjusted his cufflinks with hands that trembled slightly, not from nerves about the marriage, but from irritation about the scene he expected from Olive. His adopted daughter had been unusually quiet all morning, which in his experience meant she was planning something dramatic. He'd already spoken to Mrs. Mildred about having security ready to escort her out quietly if she caused another disruption. "Mr. Hale," Alfred's voice came from a doorway. "The limousine is ready when you are." Jonathan looked up, surprised to see the normally composed driver looking tense and worried. "Is everything all right, Alfred?" "Actually, sir, there's something I need to discuss with you. About Miss Lint." "Not you too," Jonathan said with a sigh. "I know Olive has been filling your head with her fantasies, but they're not fantasies, Mr. Hale. I have proof." Jonathan paused in adjusting his tie. In all the years Alfred had worked for the family, he'd never been one for drama or exaggeration. "What kind of proof?" Alfred pulled out a small flash drive. "Dashboard camera footage from yesterday. I think you need to see it before you put on that wedding ring." For a moment, Jonathan wavered. There was something in Alfred's voice, an urgency that cut through his wedding day excitement and touched the part of his mind that had built a media empire by knowing when to trust his instincts. But then Mrs. Mildred appeared in the doorway, resplendent in purple silk and dripping disapproval. "Jonathan, dear, what are you doing? The guests are waiting, the priest is ready, and that beautiful bride is about to walk down the aisle. You can't keep everyone waiting." Jonathan looked between them, feeling the weight of 300 waiting guests, dozens of photographers, and a society reporters who would dissect every moment of this day. "Alfred, I appreciate your concern, but whatever this is about can wait until after the ceremony. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. Mr. Hale, please. 5 minutes. Just look at the footage for 5 minutes." "Absolutely not," Mrs. Mildred interrupted. "Jonathan, you need to get to that altar immediately." And that, perhaps, was what decided it. Jonathan Hale had spent his entire adult life maintaining perfect control over every situation, every image, every public moment. He could not allow his wedding day to be derailed by what everyone assured him were the fantasies of a troubled child and the misguided concerns of an aging driver. After the ceremony, he said firmly, handing the flash drive back to Alfred, "We'll discuss this at the reception." Alfred's face fell, but he nodded with the resignation of a man who had served wealthy families long enough to know when a decision was final. As they walked toward the cathedral's main doors, Jonathan felt a twinge of unease. But it was quickly overwhelmed by the sight of 300 smiling faces turning toward him as he took his place at the altar. The organist began the processional, and the massive doors at the back of the cathedral swung open. First came the bridesmaids, then the maid of honor. And then, in a moment that took Jonathan's breath away, Sabrina appeared in the doorway. She was radiant, ethereal, everything he had ever dreamed of in a wife. The assembled guests sighed in collective appreciation as she began her slow walk down the aisle, her train trailing behind her like something from a fairy tale. Jonathan felt his earlier doubts dissolve in the face of such perfection. Surely nothing so beautiful could be dangerous. Surely Olive and Alfred were simply overreacting to the natural anxiety that comes with family changes. But in the third pew from the back, Olive Bennett sat with her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She could see the slight bulge in Sabrina's bouquet where something was hidden among the flowers. She could see the way Sabrina's eyes scanned the congregation, calculating, searching for potential threats. And she could see the slight smile that played around Sabrina's lips, not the nervous happiness of a bride, but the satisfied expression of a predator closing in on its prey. As Sabrina reached the altar and took her place beside Jonathan, Olive made a decision that would change everything. She wasn't going to wait for Alfred's video evidence or the police he'd promised would be there. She wasn't going to sit quietly while the adults made their speeches and the ring was placed on Jonathan's finger. If no one else would protect the man who was supposed to be her father, then she would do it herself. Even if it meant everyone would think she was crazy. Even if it meant losing the only family she had left. Because sometimes, Olive realized as she watched Sabrina's cold eyes fix on Jonathan's trusting face, love meant being willing to lose everything to save the person who mattered most. The priest began his ancient words, and Olive took a deep breath, preparing for the moment when she would once again have to choose between being good and being brave. This time, she chose brave. "If anyone here has just cause why these two should not be wed, speak now or forever hold your peace." The priest's words hung in the perfumed air of St. Michael's Cathedral like a challenge thrown down before 300 witnesses. In the traditional pause that followed, The only sounds are the whisper of fabric as guests shifted in their seats. Sabrina's grip tightened on her bouquet, her fingers finding the small vial hidden among the roses. If the ceremony proceeded without interruption, she would have Jonathan's ring on his finger within minutes. The poison would begin its work immediately. But then, from the back of the cathedral, a small voice shattered the sacred silence. Adieu. 300 heads turned as one toward the source of the interruption. Olive Bennett stood in the center aisle, her blonde hair catching the light from the windows, her blue-gray eyes blazing with determination and terror. I have just cause, she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. Her ring holds poison. She's going to murder him. The cathedral erupted in gasps, murmurs, and the shuffle of feet as guests turned to their neighbors in shock and confusion. Camera phones emerged from designer purses as society reporters sensed the story of the decade unfolding before their eyes. Jonathan's face went from surprise to mortification to fury in the space of 3 seconds. Olive, he said, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. That is enough. But Olive was beyond caring about his anger, beyond worrying about embarrassment or consequences. She had tried subtle warnings, tried private conversations, tried working through the adults who were supposed to protect them all. Now, there is only truth, spoken loud enough for everyone to hear. She has poison in her bouquet, Olive shouted, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. She's going to inject you during the reception because she knows we found evidence about the ring. Security. Mrs. Mildred's voice rang out like a war cry. Remove that child immediately. 2 uniformed guards began moving toward Olive, but she wasn't finished. Ask her about the bottles in her case. Ask her about the phone calls. Ask her why the ring burned her skin when she tested it. Sabrina stepped forward, her face a masterpiece of hurt innocence. Jonathan, I'm so sorry. I know this is difficult for her, accepting a new mother figure, but these accusations they're true. Alfred's voice boomed from the side of the cathedral as he emerged from behind a marble pillar, a laptop computer in his hands. And I have proof. The old driver moved quickly down the center aisle, his face grim with purpose. Behind him, Olive could see 2 men in dark suits following. Not wedding security, but the police detectives Alfred had promised would be there. Mr. Hale, Alfred said, his voice carrying clearly in the stunned silence. I have dashboard camera footage of Miss Lint preparing poison and placing it in your wedding ring. I have recorded phone conversations where she discusses murdering you for your fortune. Jonathan stood frozen at the altar, his mind struggling to process what he was hearing. Around him, 300 guests leaned forward in their seats, caught between horror and fascination. This is ridiculous, Sabrina said, but her voice had lost its warm confidence. A troubled child and a senile old man are making wild accusations. Based on this, Alfred opened the laptop and turned it toward the altar, the screen clearly visible to everyone in the front rows. The dashboard camera footage began to play, showing Sabrina in crystal clear detail as she opened Jonathan's wedding ring and carefully placed drops of poison into its hidden compartment. The cathedral fell silent except for the audio of Sabrina's recorded voice. Perfect. By next week, he'll start feeling dizzy, nauseous. His doctor will think it's stress from the wedding and the merger. By the time anyone realizes it's poison, I'll be a grieving widow with full access to his fortune. The color drained from Sabrina's face as her own words condemned her in front of 300 witnesses and a dozen recording devices. Jonathan stared at the screen, then at his bride, then at the ring box in his hands. With trembling fingers, he examined the gold band more closely, finding the tiny mechanism that opened the hidden compartment. Inside, clearly visible, was a small amount of clear liquid that reflected the cathedral's lights like liquid death. Dear God, he breathed. The 2 detectives moved forward, their badges clearly visible as they approached the altar. Sabrina Lint, the older detective said, his voice professional and calm despite the chaos around them. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and possession of a controlled substance with intent to cause bodily harm. Sabrina's carefully constructed facade finally cracked. The beautiful, cultured woman who had charmed her way into Jonathan's life vanished, replaced by something cold and desperate. "You don't understand," she snarled, her accent shifting to something harder and more Eastern European. "This was a business transaction. He was going to die anyway. Heart disease runs in his family. I was just accelerating the timeline." She looked around the cathedral, seeing 300 faces staring at her with horror and disgust, seeing her perfect plan crumbling into ruins. And then she did something that no one expected. She lunged toward Olive. "This is all your fault," she screamed, the hidden syringe appearing in her hand like a magician's trick. "You stupid little girl, you've ruined everything." But Alfred was faster than his 65 years should have allowed. He stepped between Sabrina and Olive, taking the needle meant for the child at his own shoulder. The cathedral erupted in screams as Sabrina fought against the detectives trying to restrain her, as Alfred collapsed to the marble floor, as Olive dropped to her knees beside the man who had believed her when no one else would. "Alfred," she sobbed, pressing her small hands against the injection site. "Alfred, stay with me. Call 911, Jonathan shouted, finally finding his voice as he dropped beside them. "We need paramedics now." The older detective was already on his radio, calling for emergency medical assistance as his partner finally managed to handcuff Sabrina and force her to the ground. "What was in the syringe?" the detective demanded. Sabrina's eyes glittered with malice and hatred. "Concentrated ricin. He'll be dead in 6 hours, and there's no antidote." Olive looked up at Jonathan, tears streaming down her face. "He saved me. He believed me when no one else would, and now he's going to die because of it." Jonathan knelt on the cold marble floor, his wedding tuxedo forgotten, his social standing irrelevant, his business empire meaningless in the face of what really mattered. He pulled Olive into his arms, holding her tight as she sobbed against his chest. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair. "I'm so sorry I didn't listen to you. You were trying to save my life, and I almost let you down." Around them, the cathedral had descended into controlled chaos as paramedics rushed in, as reporters frantically typed on their phones, as 300 wedding guests tried to process what they had just witnessed. But in that moment, surrounded by the ruins of what was supposed to be his perfect day, Jonathan Hale finally understood what really mattered. It wasn't the woman in the designer gown who had tried to murder him for his money. It wasn't the society approval he had spent his life cultivating. It was the brave little girl in his arms who had risked everything to protect him, and the loyal driver who had taken a poisoned needle meant for her. The hospital waiting room smelled of disinfectant and desperation, its fluorescent lights casting everything in a harsh, unforgiving glare that made even the healthiest person look sickly. Jonathan sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, still wearing his wedding tuxedo minus the jacket and bow tie, his face haggard with exhaustion and worry. Beside him, Olive curled up in a chair that was too big for her, wrapped in his tuxedo jacket like a blanket, her eyes red from crying but alert with the kind of vigilance that trauma teaches children. It had been 6 hours since Alfred collapsed in the cathedral. 6 hours since the paramedics had worked frantically to stabilize him while Sabrina Lint was dragged away in handcuffs, still screaming about business transactions and ruined plans. 6 hours since Jonathan had finally understood that the most important things in life couldn't be bought, controlled, or managed. They could only be loved and protected. Mr. Hale, a doctor in scrubs, approached them, her face carefully neutral in the way that medical professionals learn when they have to deliver news that could destroy a family. Jonathan stood up quickly, his heart hammering against his ribs. "How is he?" "Mr. Morrison is stable," the doctor said, and Jonathan felt his knees nearly buckle with relief. The ricin exposure was significant, but we were able to begin treatment within the critical window. He's going to be very sick for the next few days, but we expect him to make a full recovery. Olive burst into tears, not the desperate sobs of grief she'd been holding back, but the cleansing release of relief and gratitude. "Can we see him?" Jonathan asked. "He's sleeping now, but you can visit briefly. He's been asking for both of you. They found Alfred propped up in a hospital bed, connected to various monitors and 4 drips, but very much alive. His face was pale and drawn, but his eyes were clear and alert when he saw them approaching. "They are my heroes," he said softly, his voice hoarse, but warm with affection. "We're not the heroes," Olive said, taking his hand carefully. "You are. You saved me. You saved all of us." Alfred squeezed her small fingers gently. "You saved all of us, little one. Your courage started everything. I just followed your lead." Jonathan pulled a chair close to the bed, still struggling to find words for everything he was feeling. "Alfred, I don't know how to thank you. You risked your life because I was too stupid and stubborn to listen." "Mr. Hale," Alfred said with a weak smile, "in 35 years of working for wealthy families, I've learned that the mark of a good man isn't whether he makes mistakes. It's whether he learns from them." "I've learned," Jonathan said quietly. "I've learned that I've been a terrible father to Olive, and a terrible employer to you, and a terrible judge of character in every way that matters." "You haven't been terrible," Olive said, surprising them both. "You've been scared. I know what that feels like." Jonathan looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time since she'd come to live with him. He saw the wisdom in her young eyes, the strength that had carried her through foster homes and family losses, and the terror of knowing a truth that no one would believe. "You're 9 years old," he said wonderingly. "You shouldn't have to be braver than the adults around you." "But I was," Olive said simply, "and that's okay. Sometimes kids have to be brave for the grown-ups." A soft knock interrupted them. A police detective, the younger one from the cathedral, stood in the doorway with a notebook in his hands. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I need to get some additional statements while the events are still fresh. Miss Lind has been formally charged with attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and possession of controlled substances. The DA wants to make sure we have everything we need to put her away for a very long time." "What else do you need to know?" Jonathan asked. "We've been investigating Miss Lind's background since the arrest," the detective said. "Her real name is Sabrina Volkov, and she's part of an international organization that specializes in marrying wealthy men and then eliminating them for their fortunes. You're the 3rd target we know of. The other 2 weren't as lucky as you were." Jonathan felt sick. She's done this before. Twice. A tech billionaire in Silicon Valley 3 years ago, and a real estate mogul in Miami last year. Both deaths were attributed to natural causes until today's events made us take another look. "How many women are there like her?" Olive asked quietly. The detective's expression was grim. "More than you'd think. It's a lucrative business model for people without consciences." "But not this time," Alfred said from his hospital bed. "This time they picked the wrong family." The detective smiled. "They certainly did. Miss Bennett, your testimony is going to be crucial in not only putting Sabrina away, but in helping us identify and locate other members of her organization. You may have saved more lives than you realize." After the detective left, the 3 of them sat in comfortable silence for a while, processing everything that had happened. The magnitude of what they had survived, the closeness of the call, the bonds that had been forged in the crucible of crisis. "What happens now?" Olive asked eventually. Jonathan reached over and took her hand. "Now we go home. We become a real family, and we figure out how to live like people who actually care about each other." "Mrs. Mildred isn't going to like that," Olive said with a small smile. "Mrs. Mildred is going to have to adjust," Jonathan replied firmly. "She was so eager to see me married to Sabrina that she refused to listen when you tried to warn us. That kind of judgment is dangerous, and I won't have it in our home anymore. Are you going to fire her?" Jonathan considered this. "I'm going to give her a choice. She can learn to treat you with the respect and love you deserve, or she can find employment elsewhere. The same goes for any staff member who thinks children should be seen and not heard." Alfred chuckled weakly from his hospital bed. "That's going to be quite a conversation." "It's overdue," Jonathan said. "I've spent too many years letting other people make decisions about what was best for my family. That stops now, so what will be different?" Olive asked. Jonathan looked at her thoughtfully. "Everything. We'll have dinner together every night, instead of me eating in my office while you eat with whatever nanny we've hired. We'll talk about your day, your friends, your worries, your dreams. We'll take vacations together, real vacations where I leave my phone in the hotel room and actually pay attention to you. And if I see something that worries me, something that doesn't seem right, then you tell me immediately, and I promise, I absolutely promise, that I will listen to you. No matter how busy I am, no matter how important the meeting or the deal or the deadline, your safety and your concerns will always come first. Olive nodded solemnly. Okay, I can live with that. Jonathan laughed, the first real laugh he'd had in months. I'm so glad you approve. Just one more thing, Olive said, reaching into the pocket of his tuxedo jacket. She pulled out a small object wrapped in tissue paper. I made this for you. She unwrapped a ring made of clear resin, with small flowers and leaves embedded inside it. It was handmade, imperfect, and the most beautiful thing Jonathan had ever seen. I don't believe in diamonds, Olive said, echoing the words from the story outline. I believe in the truth. Jonathan took the ring and slipped it onto his ring finger, where his wedding band was supposed to have gone. It fit perfectly. It's the most beautiful ring I've ever seen, he said, and meant it. From his hospital bed, Alfred smiled as he watched the two of them, the wounded tycoon and the brave little girl who had saved his life, finally becoming the family they were meant to be. Sometimes, he reflected, the most important weddings were the ones that never happened. And sometimes, the most beautiful rings were the ones made with love instead of poison. 3 months later, on a crisp January morning, Jonathan Hale stood in the kitchen of his Manhattan mansion, making pancakes. This was noteworthy for several reasons, not least of which was that Jonathan had never made pancakes in his life, didn't particularly know how to make pancakes, and was currently surrounded by enough flour and batter to suggest that the learning process was not going smoothly. I think you're supposed to flip them before they turn black, Olive observed helpfully from her perch at the kitchen island, where she was sketching in a new art pad, when a mini gift Jonathan had discovered she loved when he finally took the time to ask about her interests. Helpful advice, Jonathan muttered, poking at a particularly stubborn pancake with a spatula. Perhaps you'd like to take over? Nope. You said you wanted to learn how to cook for me, and I'm going to let you learn, even if it takes a while. Alfred, fully recovered from his ordeal and sporting a new title as Family Operations Manager, which is a fancy way of saying he now helped run the household instead of just driving the car, entered the kitchen carrying the morning newspapers. How's the pancake project progressing? He asked with barely concealed amusement. It's progressing, Jonathan said darkly, scraping what might have once been breakfast into the trash. Slowly. The important thing is that you're trying, Olive said generously. Besides, I like cereal just fine. Jonathan looked at her and felt the same rush of amazement he'd been experiencing for months now. Amazement at her resilience, her generosity, her ability to find joy in simple things like Saturday morning breakfast attempts. The past 3 months have been a period of profound change for all of them. Sabrina Volkov, her real name, had been sentenced to life in prison without parole after pleading guilty to attempted murder, conspiracy, and a dozen other charges related to her previous victims. The international organization she'd worked for was being systematically dismantled by law enforcement agencies across 3 countries. Mrs. Mildred had chosen to seek employment elsewhere after it became clear that Jonathan's new priorities didn't align with her vision of proper household management. Her departure had been mutual and amicable, though she'd made it clear she thought he was making a mistake by coddling the child. The mansion itself had been transformed from a showcase to a home. Olive's artwork covered the refrigerator and several walls in the family room. The formal dining room had been converted into a library and homework space. The sterile guest bedrooms had been redecorated as spaces for friends to visit, because Olive was finally making friends at school, now that she felt secure enough at home to open up to other children. Most importantly, Jonathan had stepped back from the day-to-day operations of his media empire, promoting trusted executives and restructuring his schedule so that he was home for dinner every night, available for school events, and present for the ordinary moments that make up a childhood. The school called yesterday, Alfred said as he sorted through the mail. Olive's teacher wants to nominate her for the district's Courage Award. What for? Olive asked, looking up from her sketch. Apparently, word got around about what happened at the wedding, Jonathan said with a smile. Your classmates think you're something of a hero. Olive wrinkled her nose. I don't feel like a hero. I just did what anyone would do. That's exactly what makes you a hero, Alfred pointed out. Heroes never think they're heroes. They just think they're doing what's right. Jonathan finally managed to produce a pancake that was golden brown instead of charcoal black. He presented it to Olive with a flourish that made her giggle. Your breakfast, madam. Thank you, sir, she replied formally, then ruined the effect by drowning the pancake in syrup and taking an enormous bite. It's perfect. It wasn't perfect. It was a little lopsided and slightly undercooked in the middle. But Jonathan had learned that perfection wasn't the point. Love was the point. Effort was the point. Showing up was the point. I have some news, he said as he attempted another pancake with slightly better results. I've been thinking about what we should do for your birthday next month. Olive's birthday was a subject they'd been discussing for weeks. It would be her first birthday as part of a real family, and Jonathan was determined to make it special. Did you decide about the party? She asked hopefully. I did. We're going to have it here with all your friends from school, and Alfred is going to help us plan games and activities. But I also thought we might take a trip somewhere, just the two of us. Anywhere you want to go. Olive's eyes widened. Anywhere. Anywhere. Paris, London, Tokyo, Disney World. Wherever you've always wanted to visit. She was quiet for a long moment, chewing thoughtfully on her pancake. Then she looked up at him with an expression that was wise beyond her 10 years. Can we go somewhere we've never been before? Somewhere neither of us has any memories, good or bad. Somewhere we can just be us. Jonathan felt his throat tighten with emotion. Even in planning her dream trip, Olive was thinking about their relationship, about building new memories together instead of trying to replace old ones. I think that sounds perfect, he said softly. Where would you like to go? Iceland, she said immediately. I want to see the northern lights, and maybe some geysers, and definitely some of those tiny horses. Jonathan laughed. Iceland it is. We'll go in March, when the nights are long enough to see the aurora borealis. Aurora borealis, Olive repeated carefully, testing the words. That sounds like magic. Most beautiful things do, Alfred observed, joining them at the island with his own cup of coffee. Magic is just another word for things that remind us wonder still exists in the world. As they sat in the warm kitchen, sharing imperfect pancakes and perfect conversation, Jonathan reflected on how much his life had changed since that terrible, wonderful day in the cathedral. He'd lost a fiancée who was trying to murder him, but he'd gained a daughter who loved him enough to risk everything to save him. He'd lost the illusion of control that had governed his entire adult life, but he'd gained something infinitely more valuable. The knowledge that the most important things couldn't be controlled, only cherished. He'd lost his reputation as Manhattan's most eligible bachelor, but he'd gained a family built on truth, courage, and unconditional love. Jonathan, Olive said, interrupting his thoughts. Yes, I'm glad Sabrina didn't kill you. It was such a matter-of-fact statement, delivered with such casual sincerity, that both Jonathan and Alfred burst into laughter. I'm pretty glad about that, too, Jonathan managed to say between chuckles. And I'm glad Alfred didn't die from the poison. Also a relief, Alfred agreed solemnly. And I'm really, really glad that we're family now. A real one. Jonathan stopped laughing and looked at her, his daughter, his hero, his greatest teacher in the art of what really mattered. So am I, he said quietly. So am I. Outside, snow began to fall on Manhattan, covering the city in a blanket of clean white that made everything look new and full of possibility. Inside the mansion that had become a home, a family that had been forged in crisis settled into the comfortable rhythms of ordinary love. And on Jonathan's ring finger, catching the light from the kitchen window, the handmade resin ring that Olive had crafted sparkled with a kind of beauty that no amount of money could buy. Because the best things in life, courage, loyalty, love, family, aren't bought or sold. They're chosen. They're fought for. They're earned through the simple, daily act of showing up for the people who matter most. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, they're given to you by a 9-year-old girl who believes in truth more than diamonds and loves you enough to save your life. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the power of courage in small packages and the importance of listening to those who love us most, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Sometimes we all need to be reminded that the most important voices are often the quietest ones, and that real family isn't about blood or money. It's about people who show up when it matters most. Hit that like button if you believe in the power of truth over appearances. Subscribe for more stories that celebrate the heroes among us. And tell us in the comments, who in your life has been brave enough to speak a difficult truth? Let's honor the Olives and Alfreds of the world, the ones who risk everything to protect the people they love. Because in a world that often values wealth over wisdom and appearance over authenticity, we need more stories that remind us what really matters. We need more heroes like Olive Bennett, and we need more adults who are brave enough to listen.